Jennifer Gunn. I'm the director of the Institute for Advanced Study. Thank you all for walking through the cold. It's getting a little colder, and coming today. And I'd like to open this event by remembering that the University of Minnesota is located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of indigenous people. The university resides on Dakota land ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. And the IAS acknowledges that this place has a complex and layered history. And so this land acknowledgement is one of the ways in which we work to educate the campus and community about this land and our relationships with it and with each other. The IAS is committed to ongoing efforts to recognize, support, and advocate for American Indian nations and peoples. So next week, IAS Thursday will be same time, same place, here in Crosby Seminar Room. And our speaker will be Jin Kyung Lee, who's talking about violence against women, how colonial Korean literature imagined racial and class equality. So please come again next week. We'd be happy to see you. So this talk today started almost a year ago with a conversation with Teresa Schwartz, who was going to be an IAS fellow, and we wanted to, and she wanted to bring in Allison Pugh. And it didn't work out last year, so we're very glad to have the opportunity to have her this year. And many of you probably know far more about her work than I do, but I will just let you know that she's a sociologist, and her research and teaching focus on collisions of economic life and intimacy. Her current research explores the rationalization and automation of service work that relies on relationship. And her 2015 book, conveniently available, and the author has generously offered to sign outside with the bookstore. That book, The Tumbleweed Society, Working and Caring in an Age of Insecurity, is a study of the broader impacts of job precariousness, specifically how gender and class inequality shape the effects job insecurity has on intimate life. And she also has edited a volume called Beyond the Cubicle, Job Insecurity, Intimacy, and the Flexible Self, exploring job insecurity and intimacy in multiple contexts. And that book is also available from the bookstore outside, along with her first book, Longing and Belonging, Parents, Children, and Consumer Culture. Professor Pugh has been a fellow of the American Council of Learned Societies. She's been a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University, and a visiting scholar in Germany and Australia. And her research has been, so this is the MV part, her research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and the Bankert Fund for Political Economy. So let's welcome long-awaited Allison Pugh.
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me in the back? Well, okay, good. Thank you. It's great to see so many of you here and some familiar faces. Also, thanks again for inviting me again, like re-inviting me, because the last time I was supposed to come, there was the polar vortex. And as I'm looking, I'm actually this year living in LA, so I'm reading about the weather and I don't know what they're calling it, but the enormous cold snap that is hitting the east. I'm like, does that travel that way? Is it going to happen again? So I'm glad to be here and glad to finally make it to see all of you. So today, what I'm giving you today is kind of a first crack at a book I'm writing right now in Los Angeles. It's work that I've been researching for about 4 years. And I'm not going to read it per se, but my eyes are not good enough to have it down there, so I'm going to kind of interact closely with this written document, which is my book. Okay, so today, I'd like to draw your attention to a very specific kind of work that is spread across many occupations, yet that scholars have not really identified or analyzed. And this is the work that relies on intimate knowledge, on an emotional understanding between the worker and other people to make value. So therapists, plastic and dental, teachers, coaches, primary care physicians, sex workers, even business managers and high-end sales staff, many depend on their ability to connect with others to make their contribution. Clients healing, students learning, employees motivated and engaged, etc. And I call this work connective labor, and I've been researching it for 4 years. We know from randomized controlled trials that connective labor has a powerful impact on people's learning and healing. But the distribution of this work, who or what performs it, and for whom, is radically uneven and getting more so, most especially in the United States, but with similar trends in other developed countries. On one end of the economy, we see that one of the fastest growing set of occupations in the United States right now is what economists call wealth work, which are personal services that workers provide for rich people, from personal trainers to personal chefs to personal counselors. These are kind of stock photos of people doing exactly this work. And as the word personal tells us, this is work that is customized, face-to-face, involves some kind of intimate knowledge where the worker knows the client, their troubles, and their desires. In other words, connective labor. And the growth of this work is one of the outcomes of the meteoric rise of inequality and the hollowing out of mid-level jobs. In essence, the people over here are working for the people over here. And while the rich hire humans to be their personal investment advisors or personal shoppers, at the very bottom of the income ladder, disadvantaged people increasingly get connected labor that is automated, such as robot discharge nurses or virtual preschool. The engineers who design these programs argue that they are better than nothing, and they are not necessarily wrong, but they also assume that relationships can be reduced to emotions, that personalization without the personal can work, and that nothing is the best that we can do in terms of human connected labor for poor people. Meanwhile, for the harried middle class comes the proliferation of tech companies that provide online platforms for connected labor on the fly, such as Care.com and Urban Sitter, with disenfranchised workers conducting connected labor as a gig. So in the emerging landscape of this work, then, we are seeing the rise of what's been called a servant economy, and a thinning out of connective labor by scripting, by increasing precarity, and by automation. There is inequality in who is on the receiving end of these different kinds of connective labor, as well as in who provides this labor and whose labor is standardized or automated. And the distribution and conduct of connective labor matters, I argue, not just because of its measurable instrumental outcomes, but also I would suggest that it generates a kind of social intimacy, mutual recognition that forms the bedrock of belonging. So today, I won't talk about whether or not connective labor can be replaced or even augmented, as the AI researchers like to call it, because it already is. Instead, I'm going to define it and describe it, and then discuss how we organize this labor today, and how that has created a crisis that makes its automation possible and even appealing, and how doing so affects its experience. And while there are some surprises along the way, this is a story of the stratification of social intimacy. We should all care when connected labor becomes not the solace of the many, but a luxury for the few. So, connective labor. Connective labor is the work of creating and reflecting an emotional understanding of another person in order to use that reflection, which we might call mirroring or witnessing, to create some sort of value. So it's made up of 4 components: 2 about seeing the other, intimate knowledge and empathy, and 2 about communicating that vision, reflecting or witnessing, and also emotional labor. Intimate knowledge is when workers try to understand another person's particular needs and desires, whereas empathy is more of a shared understanding of their emotional meaning. And workers also reflect back what they see of the other person, and they use emotional labor or managing one's own emotions to generate appropriate feelings in the other person to try and shape how the other person feels about that reflection. So, for example, don't worry, lots of examples, we're going to really get into this definition. This spring, for example, I observed Beth, who is a white woman and a hospital chaplain. And she was visiting Jordan, an African-American patient, and his wife, Mariah, in their shared hospital room in Virginia. And Jordan mostly complained to Beth about his medical care. He didn't want radiation. Oh, sorry, I didn't say this. Jordan had brain cancer, and it's a terminal diagnosis. But he was actually kind of chatty when Beth sat down with him. But he's mostly complaining. And he says, you know, he doesn't want radiation, there's no cure, I should be able to choose whether or not to do anything, just keep on moving on to the next person. And they brought him to the wrong specialist. Why are you sending me up to a heart doctor? He don't know nothing about the brain. And they kept getting his medication wrong, he said. And Mariah's sitting very quietly to the side, her eyes kind of askance, her face is very closed, and she shakes her head without meeting Beth's eyes when the chaplain is asking her if there's anything she could do to help her during this difficult time. And I got the sense that Mariah was not that interested in or hopeful about what these like white ladies could offer her. But when they all stood up to pray, clasping hands in a circle in a kind of what was very clearly a familiar ritual to all of them, Beth showed how closely she had been listening. She says, help these people get the medicine he needs, help them get more focused care from their care team, help him ease his frustration, and help them both as they go through this journey. So she's really like seeing and hearing what he's saying and reflecting it back to them. And Jordan says like a quiet amen to Beth when she finished, but Mariah's face just opened up like a huge transformation, really. Very light, a light face, that's all I can say, it really brightened. So Beth's connective labor demonstrated that she not only understood the specifics of Jordan's complaints, but also their emotional meaning underneath. And she reflected this understanding to both of them without showing impatience or skepticism about his litany. And it worked to great effect, at least for Mariah. And as this example shows, and as most practitioners told me in my research, the most important part of connective labor is the seeing. So recognition theorists include psychologists who talk a lot about mother-child interaction, and philosophers like Axel Honneth, etc., talking about cultural groups and how much we recognize each other on the cultural plane. And they have each argued that seeing each other forges a kind of solidarity, and when we misrecognize or ignore each other, it creates psychological pathologies and also political resentments. But I'm pointing instead to connective labor that's taking place in a sort of middle space in the kind of mundane world of everyday commerce. And I think that this is consequential not just for one's psyche or one's politics, but also for this notion of social intimacy, the interactions, everyday interactions that contribute to a sense of belonging in place. So, connective labor is part of many occupations that involve mental or spiritual care, from chaplains to therapists, or personal bodily care, such as primary care physicians or sex workers or funeral home directors. There's a lot of connective labor in academia. PhD advising is a perfect example, but I actually also find in-depth interviewing is also a clear case. Connective labor is also a component of those occupations that use it to lead or to inspire or compel other people, such as managers or administrators, and also those that seek to persuade others, such as real estate agents, say, or life insurance salesmen, and those occupations that use it to control others. So that would be like police, or spies, or hostage negotiators. Anything where you have to know the other person and kind of what makes them tick, and then use that in some way to create value, and what counts as value is going to be very different across those different fields. What is connective labor not? It is not, or I would say it's not only emotional labor, since you do not need to know or reflect very much about the other person to have to control your emotions for a wage. So, no baristas, no flight attendants, no fast food workers, for example. It is not, or it is not only care work, since it can also include prison guards or parole officers. Fundamentally, it is work in which people see the other to create value. So, connective labor also shares characteristics that make it particularly challenging to systematize, to standardize, or to quantify. So first, its defining trait is this reliance on personal ties and emotional connections between people in all their unique idiosyncrasies. Second, even when it is thought to lead to valuable outcomes, children learning, patients healing, how that happens is quite mysterious to people. And people will call it chemistry or charisma, and they haven't really, they have trouble pinning it down. Third, training takes place usually outside of a classroom in a kind of apprenticeship model of exposure to and observations of practical knowledge. And fourth, connective labor is feminized, so that when it's part of feminine type jobs, like childcare or social work, it's considered part of women's inborn nature, and when it goes kind of unremarked in masculine type jobs, like, say, law enforcement. So, in contrast, systematization requires people to isolate and identify and study the component parts of a given job and determine what practices can be standardized, scripted, or routinized, perhaps passed on to other people who specialize in just that one task, perhaps even automated. So in this project I actually differentiate among different kinds of systematization that I'm looking at. Those jobs where, for example, all but the connective labor is systematized, or those jobs where the employers actually try to systematize the connective labor itself. So who's listening to this, or who cares about this in terms of scholarship? There are 3 relevant literatures. This is a new thing I'm trying. Instead of like the citations, I'm putting the people's faces up there. I saw this recently at a conference and I just really liked it. I'm happy to identify the people as you see them. So the first is this group. People who essentially are writing about a sociology of intimacy in late modern capitalism. So that would be Elizabeth Bernstein, Viviana Zelizer, Eva Illouz, Arlie Hochschild, and others. And this work is broadly historical, suggesting that intimacy changes to reflect its time and its context. These scholars document that the meanings of intimacy traverse the for-pay boundary and back again. They kind of reject a purist account of valorizing only unpaid intimacy. And they document how the contemporary rationalization of human intimacy is tied to economic trends of neoliberalism. So they talk about flexibility, insecurity, efficiency. Bernstein talks about bounded authenticity when she's talking about sex workers, etc. The second is a group we might consider the sociology of standardization, or sometimes called commensuration. And these are people that look across many domains but are particularly interested in medical care. And they acknowledge kind of briefly the risks of, say, dehumanization, but they also are very careful, I think, to outline, so-called positive effects, what standardization is for. And that would be, for greater improved performance standards across, greater kind of, I would say, consistency of performance, and also a greater capacity to collaborate and cooperate. Yeah. And then the third looks at kind of, I'll put these in a separate category from the first group. These are kind of people who look at the politics of interactive service work. And that would be like, for instance, I didn't give you who the people were in the other one. The other one would be like Stefan Timmermans, Mitchell Stevens, Wendy Espeland. These are Lillian Kang, Rachel Sherman, Steve Lopez, Eileen Otis. This is actually a very large group with just a bunch of people thrown up there as examples. And these are people that write about care work, but also aesthetic labor, body work, and they're mostly focused on the labor process and its impact on the product, including routinization and speed up. And their focus really for all of them is on inequality and between the worker and the client. And their scholarship has given rise to notions such as deference work or distinction work that say, Amy hands are not up there, but like where people who are working in high-end retail have to perform a kind of distinction work to make the other people feel, I don't know, distinctive. So their analyses are often very place-bound. They're often ethnographic, based on particular places, and they're looking at specific impact of context and markets and embeddedness. So the first group suggests a kind of rationalized intimacy would be efficient and flexible and individualistic and unique and authentic in a very limited way. The second group suggests actually it would be standardized and modular and cooperative and deeply similar. And the third suggests it would be exploitative, written onto existing inequalities, consequential for identity, all that distinction, and shaped by market conditions. So I rely on all three of these literatures in this project. Now methods, what am I doing? I'm doing so much. Okay, so Beth the chaplain was one of more than 100 people that I've interviewed and observed for this project, most of them people who practice, supervise, or analyze connective labor, including these people that you see, therapists, physicians, sex workers, chaplains, hairdressers, police officers, and others. And I watched them in like doctor's offices, in schoolrooms, therapy sessions, in California, Virginia, and Massachusetts. And I also interview people who are trying to automate this work. And I'm using purposive sampling to obtain participants who vary in the degree to which their work is rationalized, trying to get some notion of the impact of rationalization on, or systematization on their labor. So this practice actually, or this sampling procedure actually varied for each occupation. So for instance, take therapy. I interviewed some people, some therapists who don't take insurance, practice a kind of psychoanalytic model, see people for 10 years, aren't really, use a lot of instinct, like those people I would say highly unsystematized labor, kind of more craft-based. And then I interviewed people at like a VA hospital or who practice cognitive behavioral therapy, very time delimited, they call it manualized, it's all evidence-based, it's scripted, so I'm trying to get a very wide, trying to vary on that dimension. And I also include some recipients, so some students and clients, et cetera, just to get their perspective on everything. And so I've also conducted hundreds of hours of observations of clinical visits and classrooms and conferences, as well as the training. And these are some pictures of just ethnographic settings that I have been working in over the past 4 years. So what am I doing? One issue is, what is this? It's so disparate, as opposed to the kind of, longing and belonging. My first book was 3 years in 3 different locations, so maybe I'm a little more predisposed to doing this. But in any case, there's a lot of different locations here, and so it's a kind of, feels a little crazy, this kind of ethnography that I'm doing. I'm inspired by, but I would say not entirely duplicating Matt Desmond's relational ethnography, where he talks about studying processes rather than processed people. I'll probably write something in which I try and be more precise, because it's not exactly right, but it's close. I'm looking for the thing that I am observing in many different places. But this has also included, so can you see all of them? Okay, that is, so I did spend 6 months in one place in an HIV clinic, studying primary care physicians in this HIV clinic, a semester observing a counseling class, a weekend, this is my weekend, spent in a horsemanship workshop teaching about the doctor-patient relationship. And so that's me riding over there, and those are all med students who are learning with the interaction with the horse something about handling patients that are skittish or whatever. Exactly, it was crazy. Okay, then in addition, you're seeing, so here I'm watching, this is counselors or would-be counselors learning how to counsel each other through a one-way mirror or an observation observed. This is in my HIV clinic. This is my ride along out 12 hours in a squad car. Yeah, so introduce for the first time to help with the data analysis, mostly because it's an enormous data trove, and I'm happy to answer more questions about methods in the Q&A. This is my current table of contents, but it might change. Okay, so here we are, into the meat of it. Much of the current organization of Connective Labor appears to look a lot like the three-part organization that Adam Reich covered in his book on hospitals called Selling Our Souls. There's the institutionalized public version, offered mostly to disadvantaged people. He calls that public care. There's the corporatized, hyper-efficient version, like Reich's group care, offered to a broad range of people. And then, getting away from Reich and going into Rachel Sherman territory, sorry, the other Rachel Sherman, a group of personal workers hired to serve the affluent, which Sherman called lifestyle workers. So for most workers, the choice sounds like public burnout, which is basically drowning in volume and frustrated by service limits, private burnout, which is drowning in consumer access and responsiveness demands, or doing a form of deference work with the rich people. And the sound I heard most often from practitioners was crisis. So I'll give you a little bit of each of those before moving on to what I think is actually the future coming. So here's those who provide, this is Michelle, and she is a white nurse practitioner in a community health clinic, and she was very explicit about the importance of what I'm calling connective labor, what she might call witnessing maybe. She says, I think we all just want acknowledgement of our suffering, even if you can't cure it or do anything about it. I make a point, I teach a lot of students about it now, I tell them about the curative properties. This is what I hear you saying, and repeating that is very good therapeutic. Yet the clinic was making that work harder. She said, we've just had a really tense conversation that we have, budgetary constraints, and we need to see, it's the same everywhere, we need to see more patients. We need to see more patients, and not only are we seeing patients every 15 minutes, but then I have to review all their labs and all their specialty visits, all their x-rays. It's just a never-ending list, and so no, there's not enough time. So those who provide connective labor in public settings sound like they are on the front lines of a battle and that they are losing. They are seeing people with extraordinary levels of need, and they are squeezed by employers to fit more and more into their work. And most of them felt a sense of mission, or talked about a sense of mission, and they talked about their frustration about not being able to do more. This is not just in medical care. So Mary is an African-American middle school teacher in Oakland, California, and she said, I have students who are homeless. I have several students who have lived in group homes, or are currently living in group homes. I have students who have parents incarcerated. I think I have an open personality, so kids talk to me and just say, hey, what's going on? And kids just wringing themselves out as if they were a sponge. I absolutely bawl when I go home. That's the valve on the pressure cooker. So this is a very robust finding. This is what they all sound like, okay? Then there's the private burnout, I would call it. Mickey is an Asian American teacher at a Silicon Valley private school, and she says, that's a tricky line, and that you do have parents who have certain expectations, and you have to in some way find respect and honor that, but at the same time, students' limitations, and so somewhere in there you have to find like a middle. It is a private school. You're paying a large sum of money, I get that. She said she held 3 parent-teacher conferences a year, plus 3 parent coffees, plus open houses, plus a weekly meeting with a parent liaison, plus the school sent out a weekly newsletter. She says, yeah, the parent part's tricky sometimes. So among private providers, connective labor workers must be available to an ever more demanding client base. Jen is actually a physician most of her job is working in a community clinic, so she's not one of these people, but it turns out she's a patient of a group care type thing. And she says, I'm so happy with group care now. They have nighttime urgent care appointments. I mean, you just call up and they're like, sure, I can see you at 8:15. I mean, the doctors are just burned to a crisp. The primary care docs there are ground into the ground. And the endless patient emails that they don't get compensated for, endless. They can squeeze the physicians and just wring every last minute out of them. So this is a patient who's also a physician and doing the squeezing, so anyway. So what these workers are reporting, either in an undernourished public setting or consumerized private one, is a vast need for reflecting work among the people they see. Jen, who was all pleased about the group care situation, was like, my patients, it's just like they're singing their siren song to whoever will listen because no one will take care of them. There used to be a not getting needs met, and they are just desperate. People seem to crave for these practitioners to see them for who they were and what they were going through. And some workers also felt surprised by how much connective labor was actually a part of their job. So Kim, for example, was a primary care physician at group care, and like others, she said she is not practicing at the top of her license. As it turns out, what she spends most of her time doing is the work of reflecting. She says, 80% of what I do is not what I learned in medical school. In some ways, I'm more of a therapist or a human counselor or something, a relation person. She's a pediatrician, she reminds me, not a mom doctor. In other words, she's not simply there to console and soothe the parents of her actual patients, but in many ways, I am a mom doctor, she says. It doesn't take, that's Jenna, sorry. It doesn't take a medical person to do that, and nobody taught us how to do that, and that's the backward part. Anybody can do that job. It is so boring and easy. When I'm just telling someone how to start solids and walking them through their panic and giving their kid their first peanut butter because they're worried about allergies, any monkey can do it, she calls it that. A relational monkey. Anyway, it doesn't require an MD. So finally, workers across multiple industries talked a lot about assessments, metrics, data entry, the electronic health record, K-12 testing, just all these assessments and what I started calling the hegemony of data. Mary, the teacher we heard about, said data needs were getting in the way of getting to know her students. She says, you've got a curriculum, you've got 180 days, you have a certain number of academic instructional hours, you have testing, testing, testing. It's hard because we need to do the social emotional stuff because for some kids, the test doesn't matter. I have a little boy right now, it's not working. I'm like, there's attention issues, his diet, he's got a girlfriend, he doesn't care about school anymore. So we have to think about these things, and we're so focused on curriculum and testing sometimes that we forget about these things for kids. The chaplains, you'd think the chaplains are free of data. No. The chaplains, here's my field notes on the chaplains. The chaplains, I recorded a conversation between Beth and another chaplain, Lauren. The chaplains talk about how the stat sheet is separate from the epic chart, which is more laborious now. Instead of a few clicks and a note, now it has much more elaborated clicks and notes, but so useful, Lauren says. And they're about to start 6 weeks of an Excel spreadsheet, not a Google Doc, Beth says, and she wishes it were a Google Doc because it would be good to be working on things together, but they have to have us each doing separate ones in which we'll write down the calls to keep track of what we're doing for a 6-week period. These are chaplains. Sorry. Okay. It's these complaints or the kind of the ways in which data is getting in the way of relationships is actually quite widely known in medicine in particular. It's a very current conversation happening right now with 50% plus burnout rates of primary care docs who are complaining a lot about having to do the data entry and how it's getting in the way. And here's an example of this was actually published, I think in JMA, something, a picture done by a patient, I think like maybe a patient's younger sister or something like that. And here's the doctor, and the doctor's like not facing the computer, and here's what the kids are doing. So the doctors, this is their reality. They think that this is true and a catastrophe. So many of them. So Christoph was a therapist who used to be a doctor, and he's now working in a VA hospital. He says, it's just like everybody is just feverishly checking it all off, and they have not time to actually look at the person. Meanwhile, at the top, where people can opt for their favorite variant of connected labor, they are choosing it to be delivered by humans in personal service that can make connected labor into a form of deference work. And data is largely absent here. One healthcare administrator laughed as he talked about the concierge care that was on offer in Silicon Valley where he lived. He said, there are ones in Palo Alto outside of Stanford that are, what's the amount? It's like $30,000 a year or something like that to be a patient. It's like, who can afford that? The people in Palo Alto. They've got long visits. Doctors will come out to your house. My joke is the doctors will pick up your dry cleaning. And it gives them what conventional healthcare is not giving them, which is very personalized attention. For the rest of us, what we have now is a perfect storm, I think, of factors contributing to the unsustainability of connected labor jobs. The work is generally unrecognized by insurers, program heads, school boards. Nonetheless, many practitioners consider it indispensable to their success. And the people they see seem ravenous for it, and at the same time are kind of picky about where they get it and who gives it to them. Practitioners are having to fit the feeding of this need into smaller and smaller increments, while data needs are expanding across multiple fields in the form of high-stakes testing, assessments, evaluations, pre-authorizations, etc. We cannot easily, this is parenthetical, why is need expanding? What's that about? So we don't actually know whether it's expanding. These practitioners feel like it's expanding, so we don't actually know whether it's expanding. But you could argue that maybe it's expanding, if it is, because of the standardization of connected labor, which I'm about to tell you about. The imposition of systems that would allow for us to scale it up and potentially extend it to more and more people may be making people feel even more unseen, kind of part of an undifferentiated mass, maybe. That's all speculation, but let me just report to you what I'm hearing from them, which is this ravenous need that feels utterly unmet. Okay, so the future, that's the kind of current and recent past, I would say. What's the future? First of all, it's here. In response to the crisis of connected labor, organizations have been adopting different approaches to manage its high demand and high costs of supply. From teams to telework, checklists, electronic records, automating all or part of the work. And some of the innovations are particularly interesting, I think, and they're overturning conventional understandings of how it should be organized. So, for example, one of my favorite examples, because it was just so challenging and interesting to me, was in a Silicon Valley school where I did some observations. It's an experimental independent school, and there are no teachers, per se. There are instead content specialists and advisors. And the kids spend the morning learning on their iPads. It is silent. They have headphones and they are on their iPads, learning. And then they use like online programs like Khan Academy, Tinker for coding, like all these, I learned about all these software programs that they have. And the use of algorithms provide personalized lessons, and that's very common actually, or becoming increasingly common, and it's very big business. I dispute the term personalization since there are no people here. Instead, I think we should call it customization, because that's really what it is. It's about what it's doing, not how it's being delivered. But it's a big business in medicine as well as in education. So in education, for example, schools are cropping up that use software to deliver lessons matched to a student's ability level. China has invested more than $1 billion last year in AI education. China has a Squirrel AI tutoring program that uses this customization. Squirrel reached $1 billion in valuation, enrolled more than 1 million students there. At the Silicon Valley school where I was, the kids turned to the content specialists for very brief, targeted lessons in like French or math, or to help unravel something confusing from the morning that they didn't get. And their schedules, I have a picture of a schedule, are personalized to meet their exact skill levels and goals. But who are the advisors? The advisors are the heart of the school. The advisors meet for half an hour with students once a week. And they help the students assess where they are, and they set learning goals. They're the ones who ask, how's it going for you overall? And when I came to school one morning, this is what I saw. I watched as a handful of kids sat at their places around these kind of kidney-shaped desks with microphones, with their headphones on, staring into computers, and it's very quiet. So that's very kind of eerie. And among them was this kind of irrepressible red-headed boy who was wiggling in his seat and exclaiming about solving some math problem and looking around to see if anyone had heard him, and no one had but me. Over in the other corner, a 7-year-old Asian girl was meeting with her advisor, a blonde woman about 30, who asked, so in programming, what do you want to do this term? Honestly, I'm not sure, the girl replied. Well, is there anything you're interested in? You could combine it with your passion project. What's your passion project? This is so Silicon Valley. The whole thing is Silicon Valley. Sorry. The girl mentioned a business she was starting, and how it was based on an invention, which she called a genius idea. The advisor listened patiently, making little murmuring sounds of assent and encouragement, and there was all the time in the world to come up with this personalized plan for programming. So the advisors and the relationships that they forge with the kids are the emotional glue for the students and their families. So much so that when the school crunches the numbers on the family satisfaction surveys, which I never got, I'd say for my kids still, anyway, that they collect, they know that a dip across a whole grade level means that advisor, it's the advisor's fault. The advisor is in charge of the relationships, the principal told me. They are someone to talk to, someone who cares about the kids and vice versa, someone who makes them feel like they belong. So the school, I think, I'm a sociologist. I cannot look at this without thinking about Harry Broderman. Is anyone else thinking about Harry Broderman? Raise your hand if you're thinking about Harry Broderman. Oh my God. So Harry Broderman wrote in like the 70s about de-skilling and how, take a nurse's job, which used to be very complicated and have things that didn't take a lot of education and things that took a lot of education, and her job was a craft of a kind of holistic approach to patient design, right? Well, you can argue that teaching is the same. The teachers have the same complexity, and what this school has done is just broken it out. So we have content delivery and we have feelers. And that's Broderman. This is de-skilling. So anyway, the school I visited had started out with a lot more computer time, the principal confessed, but kept expanding the advisor role to enlist the children's hearts. So a similar mix of technology and human relational labor, or connected labor, put in service to motivation is happening in other places too. So for example, some AI researchers, I don't know if this is going to work, we're going to try it. Some AI researchers have taken on organizing the success of stores. Do this?
4 years ago, we started to wonder.
This is the Amazon stores, the Amazon
What would
stores that get
shopping
rid of
look like
cashiers.
if you could walk into a store,
Throw
grab
stuff
what
in
you want,
here.
and
What they
just
found
go?
is that they're
What if we
worried
could
that
weave
people
the most advanced
that
machine learning,
missing
computer
the
vision, and
interaction.
AI into the very fabric of a store,
aren't gonna
so
care
you never have to
somehow
wait in
about
line?
the shopping experience.
No lines, no check.
I don't need to have an ad. Okay. Yes, that works so well. So what they've done is they've actually planned sensors that can detect the emotions that customers feel for their purchases, and then they're going to put someone under this idea. They would put someone at the front of the store in this vision whose job would be to make you feel better about what you are buying. So anyway, as these and other innovations proliferate, current trends suggest that we could face, once again, 3 tiers of connected labor. Remember, we have public burnout, private burnout, and the difference work. Well, I'm saying now that we're seeing a different kind of division. While they now experience massive institutions delivering very time-limited connected labor, disadvantaged people will get connected labor that is automated. And while they now experience hyper-efficient, consumer-oriented institutions, middle-class people will increasingly opt for connected labor delivered by the gig economy or the new economy. Meanwhile, the army of personal service workers serving the affluent. So in the time remaining, I'm going to give you a glimpse of the first 2 only. Let's see. So many AI researchers use the scarcity of personal care for low-income people as a primary motivation for their work. And this is Tim Bickmore. He's at Northeastern. He's a researcher who has produced a virtual nurse, a AI couples counselor, an exercise coach, a palliative care consultant. These are all AI enterprises. And he says, it's where we think we can have the most impact. There's a low literacy population, or particularly disadvantaged population that our current healthcare system is not adequately helping. And we think by, automating, we can greatly improve the care that they're getting. And so hopefully the AI is better than nothing. Similarly, thousands of young American children, including nearly half of Utah's 4-year-olds, are enrolled in virtual preschool. What is virtual preschool? Online programs that use animations and songs to teach pre-reading and other skills. And I'm going to show you, I have a little bit of an excerpt from it. Come on, baby. You actually click the... We don't need very long of this. So a number of Democratic candidates for president in the U.S. are proposing universal publicly funded preschool. Florida, Georgia, and Oklahoma are the only states that currently offer it, and nationally less than a third of 4-year-olds attend state-funded preschool. Okay, K, that's plenty. Got K. Well, okay. So we simply don't have the money to provide a quality pre-K experience to every child in my state, even though I absolutely agree that a face-to-face, high-quality pre-K is the best option. Never mind, I'm legislator to the New York Times. But when it's not an option for the child, I refuse to ignore that child. The mayor of a rural California town with mostly Latinx farmer or worker families said, with this program, those kids who were left out in years past, now they're going to be included. So these are better than nothing arguments, and they are pervasive and compelling. Who could argue with giving low-income people access to therapy or preschool or palliative care counseling they might not get now? Consumers of therapy apps and virtual preschool are apparently ready to embrace opportunities that are better than nothing, rather than hold out for the best. Parents of preschoolers tell journalists that the online programs make their kids smarter and more ready to learn. The surprise here, and there is a surprise here actually, is that there are indications that on some level, these programs might be better than nothing. First off, we know that computers get more honest information about people's vulnerabilities. People will disclose more to a computer about their sexual practices before they give blood. They'll tell a computer more about their financial troubles. Children are more willing to disclose bullying to a computer. And so this kind of transparency actually helps connective labor be more effective, because you want your teachers to know how little students are understanding the material, for example, or therapists to know that a client has an eating disorder or has had thoughts of suicide. Those are all actually real examples, for example, of people who didn't know that and struggled to know that. So second, Bickmore reports that 74% of his low-income patients preferred a discharge computer program to a human discharge nurse. Why? Because the program let them go slower than with a busy clinician. I prefer Louise. She's better than a doctor. She explains more, and doctors are always in a hurry, one patient told Bickmore. So providers spend an average of 7 minutes with patients at discharge, and studies have shown that low literacy patients need more like an hour. So the virtual nurse gave the patients more than just information. She gave time to digest it without the embarrassment of doing it too slowly. Talk about time is all over the public burnout stories. How to stretch 15-minute appointments, how to achieve anything in 12 therapy sessions, and AI allows disadvantaged people the luxury of a stopped clock. So connective labor workers, practitioners that I spoke to when I was telling them about this would say, these reactions just mean that the people don't want to be judged, and they reveal how bad the connective labor is they get normally. It's not that people prefer computers to people, it's that they prefer them to judgmental or unsafe listeners, or people who are tapping there and saying, why are you taking so long, as opposed to reflective and empathic ones. So those are the two sides of the argument there. But regardless of whether it's better than nothing, that's a picture of the virtual nurse. Regardless of whether it's better than nothing or better than nothing, systematizers, I think, are making 3 mistakes about connective labor. First, they're focusing on emotions rather than this reflecting work. Jonathan Gratch is a USC AI researcher. He says, a lot of us who are dabbling in this are doing these really superficial aspects of relationship building. We're making agents that are nodding and saying, and throwing in a bit of language, but there's not really a physics behind it. There's this veneer of sociality. It's like lipstick on a pig, he's laughing. There's an opportunity for AI people to better understand the real issues behind relational work beyond the veneer that we're playing with. Second, personalization needs the personal. Advocates of customization, such as we saw in the Silicon Valley School claim that it will free teachers up to pay more attention to individual students. This is a very typical claim. Anytime you hear anything about AI taking over something, or kind of augmenting or whatever, it's always about freeing up the worker to do other more meaningful tasks. It is certainly possible that with the cost savings of automating work formerly performed by humans, employers will keep the same number of employees and then instead kind of imbue the human jobs with newly meaningful work. The kids in the Silicon Valley School actually looked really joyful and self-directed, partly because there were plenty of caring adults around to make for a warmer experience. But what if a much poorer school adopted the model and saved money? Like I could imagine the kids in the cut rate version being more like the redhead I saw that morning, looking around in vain for witnesses to see and share in his discovery about math. This argument, AI will free workers up, seems really optimistic about the history of capitalism and its centuries-long path to drive down labor costs. Designers combine this optimism with this pessimism about the better than nothing that we can expect from neoliberal politics. And even more important, automated programs compete for public spending for human connected labor. So in Indiana, they spent $4 million total on public preschool, and $1 million of that went to an online program. The upshot here is that when we integrate automation into our connected labor, much depends on whether we rely upon it to do technologically what we refuse to do ourselves politically, redress inequality of access to caring and supportive reflective work. I feel like I'm taking too long, and I have the gig economy, new economy left. Have a little bit more time? Okay, I'll just do it, and then, because I'm happy to also cover it in the Q&A. I almost feel like making everybody stand up and do a little stretch. Well, we'll see. Well, I'll go a little bit longer. Okay, so remember, so that was what I believe is coming, or is here, for the lowest, less advantaged population. For the kind of middle class, which is probably most of the people in this room, the story is going to be the new economy, is going to be how people are organizing these jobs. This is Care.com, Urban Sitter, telework, where people are hired temporarily to do kind of mental health care. While conventionally employed practitioners worried about the thin version of connected labor on offer here, they would call it well, that's just like a cloth monkey. You understand that reference? Oh, some people do, some people don't. So this kind of horrible experiment done in the 1950s or 40s involving, what do monkeys care more about, love or food? So they gave essentially these infant monkeys access to a wire that gave milk, or a cloth that gave no milk, and they would just get a little bit of the milk, and then they'd go over to the cloth monkey, and it was just both of them were horrific, and it's incredible, kind of animal abuse. However, from that we come to the notion of the cloth monkey, meaning the weak facsimile of what could be a rich offering. So anyway, however, I interviewed somebody who has developed one of these, and she says tons of people. She says this kind of a kind of thin version of mental health delivered through telework. Through kind of teleconferencing doesn't work for everybody, but could work for a certain low-need population. And she says tons of people with good families, good support systems, no biological vulnerabilities shouldn't be paying $200 an hour to an expert when the support and the skills that person has doesn't require that much care. They don't have the same risk profile. She says, my passion for the project, it's really coming from a place where thousands and thousands of people for whom nothing further went wrong are so appreciative. What's it like to deliver this work, however? So Adriana was hired as an online coach for a startup that billed itself as trying to cure social anxiety. She explained it was basically someone had taken a cognitive behavioral therapy workbook and just put it on the website. And the whole idea was that they would get the therapy from the app, and then the coach would be there to just be someone who's checking on them and encouraging them to go on. You hear the de-skilling, by the way. That the therapy is doing the app, and the coach is the human who's saying, go ahead, like kind of some cheerleading, motivational. So Adriana's story is a good example, I think, of what we can say generally about connective labor in the new economy jobs. First of all, the work is still connective labor, even though it is radically mediated by these technologies and platforms. She says, I talked to some people for like months, because I think a lot of what many people got out of it was just having someone there who was like non-judgmental, good listener. It was like half an hour a week I can talk to this person and they understand what I'm going through and they're not judging, and that's what a lot of people liked about it. The very anonymity of the platform-based work takes away some of the constraints that that inhibit some clients. So this work also kind of exposed these workers to some weirdness in terms of like sometimes a total trauma dump, at least in Adriana's case. She says, people will tell you a lot when it's like basically anonymous, like you're just calling, you don't know who I am, I don't really know who you are. I've had people who are dealing with really serious trauma. But the organizations themselves, these startups and others, don't seem to value their human connective labor very much. They do not regard it as a skill, and there's not a lot of training. Adriana says, training was very minimal in the beginning. Like there was no support really, except for, except from the other coaches. And I was always just like, this is so hard. Like, I'm starting a new job where I've never done this before. Like, I've never been a peer counselor before. I don't know like how to do this. All I can do like is my best guess. And then these people are telling me like really heavy things all the time. Furthermore, the work is often so scripted that humans have to work to differentiate themselves from robots. A lot of people are like, are you a robot? This is what Adriana says. So she adopted various strategies to convince them otherwise. She says, I basically just tried to small talk with them. I would try to respond with something that seemed like more personalized. It wouldn't be like just a generic text message. Ask another question and maybe share a little bit about myself if it was like appropriate. Finally, like other gig work, what looks like freedom to make your own schedule sometimes twists into the technology serving up an endless series of clients. No, you did not have control over your workflow. Not at all, Adriana said. That was another reason why I left. It was because toward the end, it was like, I'll let you sit right here. Here's a little, while I'm reading about Adriana. She goes, that was another reason why I left, was because towards the end, it was like they were trying to like model everything using actual like algorithms and models, and it's just like, you can't account for the actual emotional burden of the job in those moments. You just can't. And in order to make it financially work, you will need to give the people, different coaches as big a workload as possible, and not everyone can handle that. So untrained, unsupported, overwhelmed, and overworked, connective labor in the new economy features many of the same problems we hear from other workers across gigs and platforms. A busy, relatively advantaged population may be willing to get drive by connective labor in return for its affordability and convenience. But this tier is costly for the practitioners. So, connective labor is a new concept for work that is widespread across many contemporary occupations. Its most important component is the witnessing of another, the recognition offered to someone else. And while we know it wields powerful impact, its contemporary organization, starved of resources, dominated by consumer demands, and crowded out by data entry needs, has created a crisis among practitioners, softening the way to its further systematization. And while innovations are proliferating, they are also kind of coalescing in patterned ways that overlap with relative advantage. So these patterns also map onto the different visions of rationalized intimacy offered by those three literatures that I identified in the beginning. So thus in the near future, we may see a division such that the least advantaged populations get automated, connectively, or that which standardization scholars predicted would be modular, networked, deeply similar, even standardized. The middle class get the fleeting efficiency of the human interactions of the gig economy, which the intimacy in modern capitalism scholars suggested would be efficient, flexible, individualized, and kind of unique in a limited sense, authentic. Finally, the affluent raise a personal service army, which, as the intimate work research suggests, would be exploitative, written onto existing inequalities, consequential for identity, and shaped by market conditions. So all three of these literatures are correct, they're just happening simultaneously. So employers do not generally recognize connected labor. Most occupations do not train it. Let's see, do I have one more? No, sorry. Most occupations do not train it. Insurers do not cover it. Yet the new landscape of connected labor suggests that invisibility might be the old problem, actually. As rich people make personal delivery one of the fastest growing set of occupations, remember, and new platforms earn billions in revenue from its online marketplace for millions of members, that's care.com, and engineers invent virtual nurses, relational agents, therapy apps, and the like. Workers are displayed, rated, and replaced, and their work is measured and intensified. And we have moved, maybe, from invisibility to a stratification of human contact. So we have, I think, a social interest in making certain kinds of connected labor more systematic, so that getting good teaching or healing is less reliant on being rich or lucky. So that's me saying, this is not only a dystopian story about hate the future, can't we go back to the next? But the systematization that is happening now is taking place without much understanding about what it is and what enables it. The first step in pushing back on these trends that I've talked about here is to identify it as a concept and to think systematically, yes, about its conduct and experience. I welcome your comments and questions. This is a quote. Who was that? Neuromancer. There's a science fiction writer who I believe came up with this quote, and this is like Silicon Valley. They're very psyched about it. So I have a picture of that.
Gibson.
Can you read that?
Gibson, I said.
Oh, really?
Is that who you did?
Yes, I think so. I can't remember. But can you read that? It's very hard to read.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk, it was really interesting.
Good.
At the very beginning, you talked a little bit about gender, but really your story was more about economic inequality and who's getting and giving services across that economic distribution.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can talk for a minute about how gender overlays with that.
Yeah, I think gender is so interesting here. And I just have so much to say about everything. So before I answer you, let me just say one thing, which is I'm at that moment, for those of you who have written qualitative books before, where it's like, I could tell 1,000 stories. So that's why this was super long too, because I was telling Rachel this is kind of like the fire hose version of, or no, I said the kitchen sink version, it's like, this is a lot. And it's not even all of what I say. So anyway, so my point there is just like, please let me know what was more or less interesting to you, because the book is being written, and you can be effective in doing something there. Okay,
For
Jen.
example, I heard only Christoph as a masculinized name of your examples up there, the guy who works at the VA.
Yes.
But all the rest seem as feminized names.
Oh, that's interesting.
It just kind of made me.
Yeah, the examples were all women. Fascinating, didn't even notice. Well, the thing that I think is really interesting about gender here is a lot. So of course these jobs at the lower levels are completely feminized. What I've been embarking on is a kind of notion of voyage of discovery about how men do this work also. It's just not kind of identified, or they don't talk about it, or so that's kind of interesting. So that's the first thing I'd say, is that we know that like care workers are often women, and women of color in particular. But perhaps it's because of the definition of this work. It's much broader than care, and also it goes up and down the status hierarchy, so it includes professionals, and so you're getting more men in there too, and more white people. So that's kind of interesting. But the thing that I think is really interesting about gender is that is something that I found out. It's particularly relevant for doctors, but I think it's relevant widely, which is in our kind of professional status hierarchy, the closer you get to a relationship, the lower status your work is. And so it's kind of like, and that's very true with doctors, for example. Like, if you're primary care, you make a third what a radiologist makes. And a radiologist doesn't have to talk to a patient ever, and a primary care, that's what they do all day, right? However, then I met a radiologist, and I don't know whether you're aware of this, but radiologists are under real threat to be automated, because AI apparently does it pretty well, like sometimes better than the human in terms of identifying anomalies or pathologies. So radiologists are afraid for their job, for their industry, for their occupation. And they see, now, because you've all heard this talk, you can view this presumption with some skepticism. However, they see relational work as not very automatable. And they think that what they need to do is be a little more patient-facing. And so I was talking to this radiologist who's talking about trying to organize his work, his occupation to get into, to no longer be deciphering or translating x-rays for the other physician, the primary care physician, but instead speak directly to the patient. They think getting into that relationship will give them a greater likelihood of maintaining a field. And I just feel like there's so much irony there. I can hardly stand how much irony there is, and gender is written all over that. Like these kind of feminized jobs that have been like kind of like, yeah, whatever, you go over there and have your little relationship. We'll be over here doing the real work. And now they're like, oh God, the ones that are not being automated are over there. Now, as you know, they are automating this work. So it's not really as protected as some populations, some people seem to think. But there's so much irony there that I love that. I think that's really fun and interesting. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
so, I have a couple of questions. One, and it's been wandering around my head since the beginning, which has to do with what you mean by value, creating value.
Yeah.
And the other has to do with the challenge of having a kitchen sink worth of data.
Oh,
in the sense that you've got
Yeah.
people from all different kinds of professions. There's so much variation going on.
Yeah.
How do you make sense
Yeah.
analyzing 20,
Yeah.
physician's assistants and 16 therapists, whatever,
Yeah.
teachers and so I just love to hear your reflections on that, and also just how you're talking about value.
Right.
Since of course you've been on the Marxian turn.
Right. I'm trying to let them tell me what value is. I'm just kind of, yeah, I don't. I'm kind of, by saying to create value, I'm not judging how valuable that is. I'm instead letting them, it's my way of just saying that it's their job.
Okay.
So, the kitchen sink, such a problem. I mean, part of it just reflects who I am, which is, the fox, not the hedgehog. So, I don't know, does anyone know what that means? Sorry. There's a kind of story or myth or whatever, trope, where you have two different kinds of people who like really know the burrow, those are the hedgehogs, and people like go around and get all the different stories from over there. That's the fox. I'm a fox. Sociologists, you could argue, are the foxes of disciplines, but really it's, people with PhDs are hedgehogs. So I am, strange in that universe. Anyway, so that kind of means this is what I do. I collect too much and then stress about how to find the story. But I actually think that is qualitative. That's what happens with qualitative data in general, even for hedgehogs. Like even if you're super delineated, there's always that moment of chaos and what am I saying? I just have a lot
But
more
I'm
of
just
that.
wondering whether there's so much,
Yeah.
there's so much difference that it becomes paralyzing.
Yes, now we're getting to the meat of it, because the question is really, or the question that I would answer for my students is, what can you claim? Like how do you know what you can claim? And I have a little article about this. It's winding its way somewhere, which is kind of, might be controversial, might not be something that makes is about resonance.
Yeah.
And what is resonance? Like, what is resonance? Resonance is not, I had 80 people tell me the same story. You just don't get that with qualitative data, as you know. So you do get a sense, I know, like the standard line for qualitative researchers, if for those of you who are not they, and I actually see a lot of qualitative researchers in here, so maybe everyone knows already, but anyway, is about saturation, you know? Like when you can practically say the words that they're gonna say out of their mouths, because you already know, you've heard this a million times, you know, that's when you know you have a thing. And so that, I think, is when you feel really strong about a claim. So when I said, for example, that's a really robust finding, that's because I just heard it endlessly. This kind of, that crisis, burnout story, that's what people are saying. And the other stuff is more like me trying to derive from fewer examples or fewer less strong patterns. And probably in the write-up, I would say that. Like there will be degrees of, you know, like kind of robustness, I guess, is the way I would phrase it. And I try and convey that. Like for instance, when I was saying, like, I think, what does connective labor do, in addition to all those randomized controls trials, which we're all supposed to be super happy about, in terms of the objectivity of those findings, you know, that it can help children learn and help patients heal, and I also think it contributes to this social intimacy. But I try and, before I make a claim like that, I say, like, I'm just speculating here. Like this is based on not very much. So, I don't know if that's what you're asking. I feel like that was the undercurrent of what you're asking, and what you may have been asking is just how do you handle all the different kinds? I'm not sure. So I can answer that one. So that one I try and kind of encounter them as groups. So in my analytic stage, which I kind of am in right now, I don't just kind of go through chronologically or whatever. I just take like a whole pile of people in a category that I want to think about, and then I, you know, code and think and memo about, like, say, you know, the gig economy or teachers or whatever, you know, people of color, you know, whatever kind of thing you want to think about, and then see what comes out, and then see what kind of spaghetti hits the wall and sticks, which is a resonance standard. Okay, let's see, I have 1, 2, 3. I don't know who was first, so forgive me.
So I'm a project manager at a consulting agency.
Really?
And I work with, I'm just doing some user testing on a health coaching app that works with health coaches to figure out how to create personalized, actual people, working through an app to create personalized workouts and nutrition. And we're testing an app, a very large vendor, and trying to figure out how we move past from our participants only valuing that coach thing, right? Like they find the most value in the coach, which is, of course, you would find the most value in the coach who's giving you this content. Next, I'm here because I wanted to hear a little bit more about therapy and virtual nursing, because I'm working on a next step, which is how do you provide chronic care and how to provide more whole person health, and make sure that it's not just delivery of prescriptions, but also like what else has to happen around it to provide the best sort of care outside of just the medical interaction within the clinic.
Yeah.
It's
So those
ironic.
both sound great.
It just sounds great. I think for me and what is in my head is that there's this sort of, everything that you said just so resonates very closely with everything that I do a lot of user interviews and all those kind of things, and so I do a lot of that, but I just don't know what to do next. It's like the so what, because I feel like the only choice that I have is to create the best experience that doesn't mess up your life, right? That provides the best value to you, but that's the only thing that I can do within the system,
Yeah.
because otherwise the system's gonna do it anyways. Right.
That kind of question.
Right. So, what do you think is happening next?
I feel like we need to get coffee. Cause there's so much there that I could talk about. First of all, just the moral universe of somebody's gonna do it anyway is not a strong, you need to kind of do what you think is right. But I'll just bracket that whole conversation right there. I actually think that some of this is of great value. I actually think, I might agree with Maggie, who was saying there are people who don't have enormous need, who have kind of structures that are set up, who don't have a lot of biovulnerability, whose mental health is not super complex. They shouldn't be paying $200. It seems like that was a plausible argument, I thought. So I think that for a low need population, I think it's good. The trouble is that it's not just about what you're doing for the customer or client or whatever. It's also about the working conditions of the person who's providing the care. And that is what I'm hoping that this book will highlight, because I actually don't have that many recipients at all. Like, it's not really about that. That might be book 2 or whatever. It's really about, like, what is it like to do this work under these different circumstances? And maybe it's not a huge surprise, but when you have like kind of new economy healthcare, it doesn't look like the conditions are very good. Like, yeah. So that's what I would say to you, is that I think apps have promise and are really interesting. We have, it's like a frontier that we are all exploring, but I want us to care more about working conditions of the people who are kind of working within it. In particular, I would say focus on time. Time seems to be the thing that people think is squeezable because of this, kind of mysterious, is it charisma, is it intuition, is it chemistry? Because connected labor, A, doesn't have a name until now, and doesn't have a kind of focus, it's just out there in the ether, and we can just squeeze it forever. And I actually think, I hope, that we can all start talking about it, and start saying it needs time, and thinking about time. And then when I was talking to the gig people, they care a lot about mentorship, not mentorship, like coaching, like talking to their peers. And actually when you talk to other people, teachers, physicians, they all talk about that. So that would be another thing that I'm hearing.
That is helpful.
Yeah.
Hey, Allison.
Hi.
So yeah, you didn't have time to talk about the managers, the high-end sales.
Yeah, I didn't talk about that.
So I was just sort of thinking about that, as you were wrapping up and sort of doing your systematization. And,
Yeah.
I mean, I can sort of see how managers and high-end sales would fit with the examples you did give us to some extent,
Yes.
including some of the gendering of it. But
Yes.
but the police, prison guards, and spies.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, go ahead.
So when Rachel's sort of asking you about this man's data, I'm wondering,
Yes.
do they fit actually?
Yeah. That's such a good question, and I have 2 answers. One is which I don't really know, and that's really what I'm hoping to answer in the coming months. Like that, I don't really know. Like in writing this talk, I was kind of like, can I put them under the same umbrella? And I actually, right before this talk, did that thing that I was telling you I do. Like I put all the kind of negative or whatever, dominant, kind of people in one pile, and then coded and thought and sat with them. I just don't know. In some respects, yes, and in some profound respects, no. So I don't.
Give us a tidbit.
Okay, so I can give you some. So the ways in which they are under the same umbrella is they often talk about the same kind of thing. Like they talk about how you get to know someone and what do you rely on to get that intimate knowledge that is so crucial. And they'll talk about intuition and vibe and non-verbal cues, and they'll talk about boundaries, and So I would almost say some of the practical skills or whatever of the work is very similar across wildly disparate, and even across these boundaries of well-being or whatever you want to call it versus domination or some control. However, some really strong differences, as you could completely imagine. One of them is, I thought was kind of interesting, is that the sex workers and the police sound closer than the sex workers and the physicians or the funeral home directors or hairdressers, and they both are kind of hate their client or population, not client, but population, and they talk about performance. I am just performing. You don't hear any performing language. Everybody else. Maybe it's because I'm not talking to people who are burnt out enough. But even the burnt out people are not talking about I'm just having to perform, whatever, listening or witnessing or whatever. Nobody's really talking about that. Partly because I'm not asking, I guess, for how authentically they care. That's not. I haven't really cared about that. But the sex workers and police are often talking about it's just a game and I'm gaming them and I'm performing this because they expect that. And, it's a very strong performance language, which I think is probably a way to kind of morally come to grips with what you're doing to another person. I actually am not anti-sex work. It just happens to be the sex workers that I was talking to. I actually sampled sex work thinking that I would get people who were providing witnessing. I thought it would be kind of interesting how similar they would be, and instead, I'm not sure why. It's a very unique population, is what they are. They're called sugar babies, which are that's a platform that is kind of sex work, but everyone agrees that it's sex work or whatever, but not everyone. Basically, the men who are using it are trying to get sex, and the women who are online are trying not to give it, instead of a more straightforward, yes, I'm a prostitute, and here, let's how much money is it going to cost. So I feel like if I had those kind of sex workers, maybe they wouldn't hate their clients, or maybe they would, I don't know. But anyway, this unique kind of sex worker plus the police have a very kind of hostile language, and then they also use this kind of performance, and it's about gaming, and they sound like the kind of Goffmanian, performing person that's actually one of my critiques of the intimacy service work, body care work. People were talking about inequality, which is so great, because the other ones aren't necessarily as much, but they never talk about it being meaningful. Except for the sex workers and police, they don't sound that recognizable to these people who are always talking about how powerfully meaningful it is. Well, not always, but sometimes. And over here, it's not meaningful. It's instead I'm just going to get them because I'm going to do that. So it's pretty different. That's the tidbit I have to offer. Yes.
With many people here, your work resonates quite a bit.
Oh, thank you.
And I wish I had your work many years ago. Arlie Hochschild's Manning's Heart was very important in my work, and a beautiful book, I think.
I agree.
I was doing ethics consultation in healthcare. And it crosses over between, I'd be one of your study objects,
Yeah.
of recognizing, listening, and so on, and then responding to very individual situations. Though we were also writing hospital standardization things for ethics, and in principle, McKinsey thought to this, that one could write a computer program to do ethics that might be more neutral and more powerful in some ways than ethics itself. So at
That's
one
so
hand with
interesting.
Arlie, at the other hand, you may know Donald Brown's work on human universals.
I do not.
Well, that's a very nice book, which he's looking at the kinds of things people share very widely from culture to culture. And of course, in philosophy, we're kind of stuck with this notion that underneath the details, there are, in some ways, very common understandings.
Right.
Maybe a difference between, say, a consultation with a nurse about being in pain versus going to church on Sunday and hearing something from the Bible or something like that. It's very general.
Yeah.
It's still very personal for people there. So I have questions, actually.
Yeah.
And it's a menu, and I'm sorry, I'll run through really quickly, you can pick one or forget them all, or tell me to go away. But, one is,
That's what I feel I just did to you.
yeah, oh, you've been wonderful, and thank you. It's hard to be wonderful too, so. And Fox, you know, going the Fox kind of way gets you into these larger universals.
Yes.
So it's, although it sounds particular, it seems overwhelming that way. There's a certain generalization there that's very powerful. Anyway, one is, if you go around healthcare, people often say, well, our problem is lack of communication related to the time, but the important thing in communication is listening. So we're working here with the ear, you're working with the eye, I have some reservations, you know, seeing. And I just, so face to face I know is an issue.
Right.
And of course we can get a lot of perception there. So why do you choose seeing rather than listening first?
Yes.
Second is, and I think we've talked about this a bit, although I'm familiar with work on empathy and its importance and sympathy, compassion, and, you know, the mix of things,
Yeah.
and a cognitive element, I tried to review the nursing literature about teaching empathy, and it's very mixed, at least in the time I reviewed it.
Yeah.
What have you learned about how to teach people to do this?
Yeah.
The skilling it, not the de-skilling.
Yeah.
The third thing is, suppose we, thank goodness, got rid of capitalism and injustice, inequity, and understood it's better to pay a person than make a machine to do this job, especially environmentally. Then would there be enough people to do the amount of connective work that can be done? I mean, or is there really a real scarcity of the ability to connect that's being addressed, or is it an artificial scarcity? And just one last question about authority in listening.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I think it's up to parent and grandparent and working with children. Children really want to tell you what they're doing, up to a certain age, of course.
Yeah.
It becomes secret. But until then, it's so important to have an observer. And I think it's different when you've been witnessed by your therapist versus a senior doctor who's also a surgeon and president of the hospital, or a concierge doctor, or a nurse, or people often talk to the environmental services people and are much more comfortable with them, and so on. So there's this relationship between authority and reflection that I think might be interesting.
So good.
These are not all questions. Sorry about the long list.
No, I want that.
If you want to
I
talk
want you
about
to
some of that,
actually-
that's fine.
I want you to email me if you have others, because this is,
I have a couple more.
this is perfect timing, if I can just say, for exactly this, and I'm so gratified. Okay, so I'm not trying to answer all of them. Listening versus seeing, I agree, and I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I kind of chose seeing because it was kind of what people were saying, that they felt seen, but I think they would equally agree to saying felt heard.
Yes, and there's
So
voice issues in feminism of wanting a voice, and that's all
Yeah, the
about being
voice.
heard.
Yeah, I agree, so I'm not sure about, I'm not firm about it being,
And people don't ask to be
there's
smelled.
what?
To be smelled, but I mean, it's really important too. in
Feel
building
really
a-
smelled. I don't think that would have quite the same resonance. It is true that recognition literature is a big one, and I am a little bit kind of pitching onto that a little, but I'll think about it because I am not firmly wedded. Okay, I'm gonna do teaching later, I'm gonna do artificial later. Oh, I wanted to talk about authority, that is such a good point. It's a really good point. I'm definitely gonna write about that, because the people have been talking about that also. Like, they're like, especially the doctors who are like, some of them are like, why am I even doing this? This isn't even my work, you know?
And there are other doctors, though,
and they're-
who work
You know,
with us differently from nurses and yet,
right.
and gender differently,
No, yes.
and yet are very committed to it.
No, yeah, I don't mean to kind of scoff at them, I'm just performing a little bit what I heard from some of them. And they, but they're like, the patients don't want to hear it from someone else. They want my magic listening ears, is what they said, they told me. And that's a really interesting truth. So I'll think about it, and I don't have a good answer yet, but it's definitely something to think about. Okay, this is definitely an artificial artificial crisis, is how I feel. I feel like we can always use more people who know how to do this, but those two populations that were speaking so strongly to me about their own burnout among multiple different domains, definitely could, like in a fantasy universe in which, say where we're all paid a universal basic income, I anticipate that people will do connected labor because it is inherently meaningful for those, of course, who aren't doing the inherently alienating or you might have trouble getting connected labor from your police work. Maybe not. They also were very motivated, but not for the connected labor, just for, nailing their guy or whatever. But, so yeah, I do think it's an artificial crisis generated by the need to derive profit from a kind of task that doesn't easily lend itself to that.
Although it suggests if it were actually measurable, that's one of the challenges.
Yes.
And actually the value were measurable, the capitalists would own it and manage it even
Get
more
excited
closely.
about it.
Right.
Yes, people pay for it. The trouble is, anyway, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't interrupt. And then just finally about the teaching. I actually did a lot of my observations were of training and teaching because I actually saw teaching as a moment, as a site of systemization, because people have to like kind of, what am I doing? How does one do it well? What is the component of this work? Like they had to kind of articulate it for these people who don't know. And except for the group of people who are like, I was just born this way, this is just innate or whatever. Most of the practitioners thought if they weren't trained, they wish they had been, and they were like kind of grasping for models of how to do it and stuff like that. And so I fall under the, if there's a continuum, I fall more on the continuum that it's obviously involves some innate sensitivity, but also can definitely be taught and definitely can be identified as better and worse practices, and definitely can be evaluated and rewarded. So I'm a little bit more of a systematizer than I might have sounded. But yeah, I did see a lot of teaching. I saw some teaching that I thought went too far, like in the school counseling semester. They had like, here's a feelings wheel, and there's just, here's the, and it was all like, you're not a therapist, so you're instead, and I'm like, okay, it was very limiting, and I wasn't,
Or
but
how
sometimes
how about you're in the wrong stage of grief? You're supposed to be depressed first. But
yeah, exactly.
And we only have a few days for you to get to accept.
No, exactly. The time delimitation is a real problem. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just think about the implications for the legal aspects of the whole thing when the doctor doesn't have all the information or changes it, fabrication,
Yeah.
including the patients who don't necessarily give the full complete history.
Yeah.
And so that seems like a lawyer's would know all of this stuff.
Meaning like, maybe that's why we would want more computer involvement, because you get more honesty out of them? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I'm just thinking the conflict that the
Yes.
lawyers would bring up and twist things around.
Yeah.
I really hate to cut off this conversation, and obviously it can go on a lot longer, but